She fell alone in the Arizona desert, broken, forgotten, left to die. But one lonely farmer changed everything. Watch this heart-touching story till the end. It'll stay with you forever. Like, subscribe and comment. Let's get started. Arizona Territory, 1884. The wind roared over the open desert, carrying with it a strange loneliness that only the wild frontier could know. The sun hung mercilessly in the sky, painting the land in gold and blood-red hues. Nita rode hard, her black hair whipping behind her like a river of ink against the burning air. She was proud, fierce, the daughter of an Apache warrior. Her spirit belonged to the earth, the sky, and the rhythm of galloping hooves beneath her. Every beat of her horse's stride echoed her heartbeat, every breath filled with freedom and the scent of sage and dust. But in the blink of an eye, fate turned cruel. A jagged rock, half hidden in the sand, caught her horse's hoof. The animal stumbled, screamed, and threw her forward with a sickening thud. She hit the ground hard, the world spinning, the taste of iron and dust on her lips. The pain came next, sharp and searing, crawling up her leg like fire. She gasped, trying to move, but her right leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The realization hit her chest like a hammer. It was broken. Her horse, panicked and wild, galloped away into the shimmering horizon, leaving her alone in the vast emptiness. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rasp of her breath. Sweat ran down her temples, mixing with tears and dirt. She tried to crawl toward a cluster of rocks for shade, her fingers digging into the hot sand. Every movement sent a wave of agony through her body, but she clenched her teeth and pushed forward, refusing to surrender to the pain. She was Apache, raised to fight, to endure, to never let weakness win. Hours bled into one another. The desert sun burned mercilessly, and the world began to blur at the edges. Nita's vision flickered, flashes of her village, her mother's laughter, the songs sung by the fire, all dancing in her mind like ghosts. The dry wind carried whispers of her ancestors, voices that urged her to hold on. Her lips cracked, her throat burned with thirst. She could taste death in the still air. A vulture circled high above, its shadow drifting slowly across her motionless body. She dragged herself another few feet before collapsing, her cheek pressed against the scorching sand. The ground seemed to hum with heat, and her breathing slowed. She stared at the endless horizon, the red mountains trembling in the distance. And for the first time in her life, she felt small, fragile against the might of the desert. As the day dragged toward evening, the colors around her softened. The gold became amber, the red turned into violet. The air grew cooler, yet she trembled from exhaustion and pain. She whispered a prayer in her native tongue, asking the Great Spirit for strength, for mercy, for water, or an end. The desert gave her only silence. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, the lonely cry echoing her despair. She closed her eyes and listened to it fade into the wind. Her body was weak, her spirit flickering like a dying flame. She thought of her people, of the dances, the songs, the life she might never return to. The thought broke something inside her. A single tear slipped down her face, vanishing into the dust. When night began to fall, the stars slowly blinked to life overhead, cold and distant. The air, once scorching, turned sharp and biting. Nita shivered, curling herself as best she could. The pain in her leg had dulled into something heavy and constant, pulsing with every heartbeat. She could no longer tell where the world ended and her body began. Everything blurred into a haze of hunger, thirst, and fatigue. She thought she heard voices at one point, deep human voices carried by the wind, but when she turned her head, there was nothing. Just the shifting sands and the whisper of the desert breathing. Somewhere deep inside she still clung to a flicker of will, a quiet, stubborn voice that refused to let her die here, nameless and forgotten. But as dawn began to paint the sky in pale light, that hope began to fade. Her body was stiff, her skin dry and blistered. She could barely move, barely think. A single hawk soared above, watching her from afar. In that moment she made peace with herself. She closed her eyes, murmuring her final prayer. Her voice barely more than a breath. If I must go, Let the wind carry my spirit home." The desert answered her with silence, and then, faintly, the sound of wagon wheels in the distance. It was faint, uncertain, but real. Hope flickered once more in her chest, fragile but alive. And somewhere far down the dusty trail, a lonely farmer named Samuel turned his head toward the sound of a woman's cry. The wagon wheels creaked softly as Samuel guided his old mare through the deepening dusk. The desert stretched endlessly around him, silent, golden, and lonesome. He was a man used to solitude. For years, he'd spoken only to the wind, the soil, and the whispering wheat that grew by his small homestead. But that day, fate had placed something different in his path, a woman broken and fading beneath the crimson sky. He'd nearly missed her, lying half buried in the dust near a dry creek bed. When he lifted her into his arms, she was light as a whisper, her breath faint but still there. Her skin burned with fever. Her leg was twisted and swollen. He didn't know her story, didn't need to. All he knew was that she was alive, and she needed him. When they reached his farmhouse, the last of the sun disappeared behind the hills. Samuel carried her inside, laying her gently on his old cot near the hearth. The house was small, a single room built of pine and quiet memories. He lit a lantern, its glow soft against the wooden walls, and fetched a bowl of cool water. With rough but careful hands, he washed the dust from her face, whispering as if afraid to wake her. "You're safe now, miss. You're safe." He didn't know if she understood English, but something in her breathing seemed to ease at his voice. He made a splint for her leg with 2 pieces of willow and wrapped it in strips torn from his only bedsheet. When he finished, he sat beside her through the night, feeding the fire whenever it faltered. Outside, coyotes howled, and the wind rattled the old window, but inside there was peace. For the next few days, Samuel did everything he could. He boiled herbs, changed her bandages, and spooned broth to her lips when she was strong enough to eat. When she woke, her eyes met his, dark, cautious, full of a pain he couldn't begin to understand. "Where am I?" she whispered one morning, her voice dry as sand. "You're home for now," he said softly, offering her water. "Name's Samuel." She nodded weakly, watching him as though trying to decide whether he was real. Later, she told him her name, Nita, and the sound of it lingered in his mind long after she fell asleep again. Days turned into weeks. Her leg began to heal, though she still winced with every step. Samuel built her a wooden chair so she could move about the house more easily. It wasn't perfect, rough around the edges like him, but when she touched it, she smiled for the first time. That smile did something to him. It filled the empty corners of his house with light. They began to share words, his in English, hers in Apache. She would point to the fire and say "ko," to the sky and say "yusen," teaching him the language of her people, the language of the land itself. In return, he taught her how to read a few words from his old Bible, though neither of them were truly religious. "It's not about the words," he said once. "It's about what they make you feel." Nita listened as he spoke of loss, of a wife buried long ago beneath a willow tree, of years spent trying to grow something in the hard soil of Arizona. She saw the quiet grief behind his calm eyes, the weight of years spent alone. "You have a strong heart," she told him one evening as the light faded. "Even if it's tired," he chuckled, a low sound he hadn't made in years. "Guess it still remembers how to beat." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was gentle, shared. One night, as rain fell softly outside, Samuel found Nita staring through the open door at the fields glistening in the moonlight. "Back home," she said quietly, "they would not have kept me. I could not hunt or ride. To them I was broken." Samuel looked at her, his voice steady. "You ain't broken. You just needed someone to see you right." She turned toward him, eyes shining, and for a long moment neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the space between them, warm, forgiving. By the end of the month she was walking again, though slowly. The day she took her first full step without pain, Samuel stood watching from the doorway, a small smile breaking through his usual stillness. "Told you you'd dance again," he said. She laughed softly, the sound carrying through the quiet morning air. In that laughter he heard something he hadn't felt in years: hope. When the time came for her to leave, neither spoke of it. Nita saddled one of Samuel's horses, her legs strong again but her heart heavy. He handed her a canteen of water and a bundle of food. "You sure you'll be all right?" he asked. She nodded. "You gave me back my feet," she said simply. "Now I must use them." He wanted to ask her to stay, to tell her that the house would feel empty without her laughter, that he'd grown used to the sound of her voice at dusk. But he didn't. Instead, he simply said, "Then ride safe." As she mounted the horse, the rising sun painted the world in soft gold. She turned once, looking back at the man who had saved her life. Her eyes held something unspoken: gratitude, sorrow, and something deeper. "The world forgot you too, farmer," she said softly. "But I will remember." Samuel stood in the doorway long after she vanished beyond the ridge. The wind carried her words across the wheat fields, mingling with the rustle of leaves. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He looked at the small wooden chair by the fire, the one he'd made for her, and smiled faintly. "You saved me too," he whispered, his voice lost in the whisper of the wind. And as the day began anew, Samuel returned to his fields, the sun warm on his back, the earth soft beneath his feet. Somewhere far beyond the hills, a proud Apache woman rode with a healed leg and a heart that carried a lonely farmer's kindness like a secret prayer. The desert, once cruel and empty, now held a memory of two souls who found each other when the world had forgotten them both.